Today, I will certainly tell the story of the old case of Hushan. This case was a major intentional homicide that took place in Shanghai. Before delving into the details of this case, I want to first share a story about a buddy of mine. Let's rewind the clock to the late 1970s, when I was a first-year senior high school student. The buddy I'm talking about was my high school classmate. None of my high school classmates were my childhood friends. Only my junior high school classmates qualified as such. I grew up in Lidu and didn't move to Xining, the provincial capital, until I entered high school, which is why none of my high school peers were my childhood pals. Back in high school, I was skinny, short and small for my age. My arms were as thin as bamboo poles. I still vividly remember that during junior high, the school was selecting football players. I badly wanted to join the team and play football. What left a lasting impression on me was what our PE teacher, Mr. Gao, said. He held my arm and remarked, "Look at these arms, you think you can play football?" Then he patted my legs and added, "With this kind of strength? No way you can play football." I wasn't sickly back then, I was just naturally thin. So even in high school, I remained scrawny, probably because I was a late bloomer. Living conditions were tough back in those days, which might have also stunted my growth. Anyway, as a first-year high school student, I was extremely short. I attended the affiliated high school of Shanghai Normal University. And I absolutely hated being placed in the slow track class. Our class was made up of all the naughtiest students from the entire urban district. Due to my frailty, I could barely stand up to anyone in fights during high school. There was a classmate of mine named Zhang Cheng. That's a pseudonym I gave him. I can only refer to him by this fake name. He was in the same class as me and was probably a year older than me. He hailed from Yanjiaoshai village. Back then, there were very few students from Yanjiaoshai in our class, just a couple of girls and him, making only 2 students from that village in total. Zhang Cheng was already taller and sturdier than me back then, really strong, like a head taller than I was, in my estimation. As a kid from the countryside of Yanjiaoshai, he'd been doing farm work since he was little, so he had an incredibly robust physique. Goodness, he was so strong his hands were like vices, and his fists packed a punch like iron hammers, hurting like hell when they landed. With my first-year high school build, I stood no chance against him at all. Zhang Cheng was also a mischievous troublemaker. In class, he liked to bully everyone, picking fights with anyone who rubbed him the wrong way. Many of our classmates had been beaten up by him, and I was one of his frequent victims. I was no match for him at all. That boy was just outrageously strong. I remember once, a group of 3 or 4 of us, all of whom had been roughed up by him, decided to gang up on him and give him a good beating. But to our dismay, the 4 of us were no match for him whatsoever. He thrashed us soundly. So in his presence, we were like helpless kindergarten kids, completely outmatched, which is why he never took us seriously at all. He was so strong that he could pick us up and throw us to the ground like an eagle snatching a chick, leaving us half dead every single time. Because of this, I was petrified of him throughout my entire high school years. I always tried to avoid provoking him, choosing to endure and give in whenever possible. As I mentioned earlier, I started learning boxing when I was a first-year high school student. But even though I was picking up the moves, my physical strength was severely lacking due to my thin frame. Later, I began training at a gymnasium and fitness center, and gradually, my strength caught up. By my second year of high school, I was finally strong enough to hold my own. I knew then that if Zhang Cheng dared to bully me again, I would stand up to him and fight back. But I still couldn't bring myself to pick a fight with him first. That's just how people are when you've been thoroughly intimidated by someone before. A psychological fear lingers in your mind. This incident took place towards the end of the first semester of my second year in high school. At that time, my family lived in the family quarters of Shanghai Normal University. If we wanted to go downtown to watch movies at the Shanghai Theater or Shining Cinema, we had to pass through Yangjiashai. It was the only way. There were no alternative routes. It was the same path that led past Hutai, where we once took photos of the iron cages holding tigers at the tiger platform. That stretch of road was a mandatory part of our journey. Zhang Chang's home was located just below Hutai. I recall one time, I went to the city to watch a movie with two other kids from our neighborhood. Although there were buses available, we rarely took them since it was only 2 or 3 stops away. We always walked instead. One day, around dusk, we were strolling along, chatting casually, when I spotted Zhang Chang from a distance. Back then, the area beside the road was all vegetable fields since most of the villagers in Yangjiashai were vegetable farmers. I saw him holding a shovel, working in the fields, probably watering the crops, standing there keeping an eye on his family's plot. But he spotted me too. Even though we were far apart, our eyes met. I ignored him and kept walking with my friends, until we reached a spot parallel to where he was working by the roadside. At that point, he was roughly 20 to 30 meters away from me. As we drew level, he called out to me, "Hey! Come over here! Come here!" He never took me seriously at all, which is why he ordered me around so casually. I replied, "I'm busy, what do you want?" He cursed, "Fuck off, just come over here." I was still terrified of him, so I hesitated and said timidly, "I really do have something to do." He yelled, "Fuck you, are you coming over or not? Get over here, I've got something to tell you, something to ask you." In that situation, he was hurling curses at me left and right, with my two friends standing right beside me. I remember thinking if I'd been alone and he'd called me over like that, I would have obeyed. But this was my second year of high school now. I truly believed I could take him in a fight. A thought crossed my mind, how dare you still treat me like this? If I don't stand up to you today, I'll never be able to hold my head up in front of my friends again. So I climbed down from the road onto the narrow ridge that ran through his family's vegetable field and walked over to him. He was standing there, holding his shovel planted firmly in the ground, with his chin resting on the handle, looking completely relaxed and carefree. He said, "Where the hell are you off to?" That's when I snapped, "How dare you treat me with such little respect, cursing at me like this in front of my friends?" With that, I mustered up all my courage, ready to risk everything, and threw 2 quick punches. The blows sent Zhang Chang stumbling into a ditch, completely knocking him off his feet. But he reacted incredibly quickly, trying to scramble back up. I knocked the shovel out of his hand and immediately grabbed it for myself. He still hadn't managed to stand up, so I raised the large shovel and brought it crashing down hard on his back. The blow struck him hard, and he struggled, still trying to get up. Without hesitation, I swung the shovel again, hitting him squarely on the back of the head. The impact split his skull open on the spot. He collapsed beside the ditch, losing consciousness instantly, with blood gushing out of the wound. At that moment, there was no one nearby, only some village kids playing and elderly folks sitting at their doorways, who watched the scene unfold from a distance. I threw the shovel away, scrambled back up onto the road, and ran off with my two friends as fast as we could. Eventually, the villagers found Zhang Chang and rushed him to the hospital, where he had to stay for 2 whole months. During those 2 months, he never dared to tell his family that I'd attacked him with the shovel. Later, I found out that he just kept it to himself and didn't say a word about who'd beaten him up. That's why his family never found out the truth and just assumed he'd been attacked by some strangers from outside the village. As you can see, that one single fight was enough to completely subdue Zhang Chang. From that day on, he was terrified of me, like a mouse spotting a cat. That's just how people are. If you defeat someone soundly once, they'll never dare to mess with you again. After that incident, far from becoming enemies, Zhang Chang and I actually became really good friends, hanging out together every single day. It truly was a case of no discord, no concord. Later on, we became close buddies. Normally, I never bothered befriending the villagers from Yanjiao's. I didn't like them, but he was the one and only exception. From then on, we were inseparable best friends, and our relationship remained rock solid right up until we graduated from high school. He came to my house to visit me all the time. We graduated from high school in 1980. Zhang Chang stayed in Yanjiao's and continued working as a vegetable farmer. 5 years later, in 1985, we still kept in touch and maintained a good relationship during that entire period. He never went to Hutai, though for various reasons that I won't get into here. One day in October 1985, Zhang Chang showed up at my house unexpectedly. He was a regular visitor, so it was nothing out of the ordinary. He came in to chat and hang out, and then told me, "Oh, third, I'm getting married at the end of the year." I said, "You're getting married? You're only 23 years old, that's way too young." He replied, "We are country folks, we get married early." I said, "Oh, I see, well, then I'll have to get you a wedding gift." He said, "Hey, actually, getting married will be good. From now on, when you come to my place, it'll be more convenient, there'll be someone to cook for you, so you won't have to eat out all the time." I said, "Yeah, that sounds great." But throughout our conversation, he wore a completely expressionless face, which struck me as really odd. However, I didn't want to pry, so I didn't ask any questions about it. Then he hesitated for a moment before saying to me, "Oh, third, I'm about to become a groom, but I'm not happy at all. I don't feel any joy whatsoever." I asked him, "Why? What's wrong? Don't you love her? Isn't she a nice girl?" He said, "I love her to death, I'd even die for her." I said, "Then why aren't you happy?" He said, "Oh, third, you have to promise to keep this a secret, I'm only telling you this." I said, "Go on, I swear I won't tell anyone." He said, "My fiancée was introduced to me by someone you know, Wang Kai." I said, "What about it?" He said, "I suspect there's something going on between her and Wang Kai." I said, "What? Are you sure? Do you have any proof?" He said, "I don't have any concrete evidence, but I just have this gut feeling those two definitely have something going on. But I can't tell you any more details right now." He added, "Anyway, I'm just really depressed about it all." I said, "Qiangzi, I don't know what to say about this kind of thing. But if you need me for anything at all, I'll be there for you, no matter what it takes, even if it means walking through fire and water." He said, "It's okay, I just need to figure things out on my own for now." A week or two later, still in October, a group of my buddies and I were drinking at my house one night. There were quite a few of us there. Around 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening, Zhang Chang suddenly showed up at my door looking for me. By that time, I was already quite drunk and stumbling around unsteadily. I said, "Come on in, Qiangzi." He replied, "I won't come in, old third. Can you come outside for a minute?" I said, "Just come in." He insisted, "Please come outside, I have something to ask you." I said, "What is it? What's going on?" He said, "Oh, third, can you lend me your gun?" I said, "What do you need a gun for?" He said, "Don't ask, just lend it to me." I said, "Qiangzi, do you need help with something?" He said, "No, I don't need any help. Just lend me the gun, I can handle this on my own, I'm sure of it. I said, okay, Qiangzi, we're like brothers, no matter what. But you have to be extremely careful, alright? Then I handed him my gun along with 50 rounds of ammunition, saying, take this, but please be safe. At that moment, I noticed that Zhang Chang's eyes were bloodshot. Deep down, I was absolutely terrified, but there was nothing I could do. I was too drunk to think straight. Then we parted ways. As I mentioned earlier, this was all happening in October 1985. By the end of the month, everyone from our Hutai area had to move away, and we all relocated to Urshilapu. It wasn't until the end of 1986 that I finally moved back from Urshilapu. After I returned, a lot of things happened, things I've mentioned in stories before. One day, a buddy of mine from the neighborhood told me, "Oh, Third, I have something to tell you. Do you remember Zhang Chang?" I said, "Of course I do. What about him?" It had been over a year since we'd last seen each other. He said, "Zhang Chang committed suicide." I said, "What? How did he kill himself?" He said, "Zhang Chang shot himself in the temple with a homemade gun and died instantly." I said, "Why? What made him do it?" He said, "I have no idea." In reality, I knew exactly why he'd done it. The news absolutely stunned me. Even though I lived very close to Zhang Chang's family home, I didn't dare to go there after hearing the tragic news because I knew that the gun he'd used was the one I'd lent him. A long time passed, and then one day I ran into his younger brother. I asked him, "What really happened to your brother? Can you tell me the whole story?" His brother didn't know the real reason either. I said, "Did your brother ever end up getting married?" He said, "No, he didn't." He added, later on, for some reason that no one in the family understands, he just shot himself with a gun. There was nothing more I could get out of him. I had no way of knowing any further details. And I certainly couldn't tell his brother that the gun had been mine. I couldn't say a word about it. Only I knew the truth. At that moment, a thought crossed my mind. Could it be possible that Zhang Chang had killed Wang Kai, the matchmaker, and then committed suicide? I kept turning that idea over in my head, but I couldn't share it with anyone else. Then, one day in 1987, I was waiting outside the Shanghai theater for a movie to start when I spotted Wang Kai in the square, the very same Wang Kai who'd introduced Zhang Chang to his fiancée. The moment I saw him, I knew for sure that this man was responsible for my brother's death. I walked up to Wang Kai and said to him, "Wang Kai, you killed my brother." Wang Kai stared at me in terror and said, "Tan Laosen, how dare you say something like that without any evidence? You can't just go around spouting nonsense like this. If you keep talking like this, I'll sue you." Then I said to him, "Wang Kai, listen to me and remember what I'm about to say. If you ever cross paths with me again, I swear I'll kill you. Never forget those words." Later on, Wang Kai worked in a factory throughout the 1980s. Then, in the 1990s, factories all across the country started closing down, and workers were laid off left and right. Wang Kai lost his job too. But Wang Kai was an extremely shrewd man. He went into business and eventually became a wealthy tycoon. However, he later got swindled in a business deal, which caused him to lose everything and go into a steep decline. In the end, he was completely ruined. He lost all his family fortune and ended up in poor health, ridden with illnesses. For decades, we watched Wang Kai's downfall unfold, but there was absolutely nothing we could do about it. We were completely powerless to intervene. Maybe it's because we all got busy with our own lives later on, and I eventually left Xining. So sometimes, when I think back on this whole incident, I realize that life is full of so many helpless moments. There are things we can't change, No matter how hard we try, we just have to endure them silently. It's just like that famous line from the Peach Blossom fan. I watched him build his mansion high. I watched him feast his guests with pride. I watched his mansion crumble overnight. Truly, there are times when we are utterly powerless to do anything at all. And that, my friends, is the end of the story about my buddy Zhang Chang. Now, let's get down to the main topic, the old case of Hushan. This case took place in Shanghai, specifically in Shanghai County, a place that probably doesn't even exist anymore, and I'm not entirely sure where it was located exactly. The case we're about to discuss occurred right there in Shanghai County. In Shanghai County, there were two men, one surnamed Dao, called Dao Long, and the other surnamed Huang, named Huang Tao. Both of them were already quite old by then. By 1982 or 1983, they were nearly 30 years old, so they must have been born around 1953. These two men were childhood friends, as close as brothers. Zhao Long worked as a laborer for the Shanghai Water Supply Company's engineering team. If you can imagine, working for a water supply company's engineering team means you're just a manual laborer, digging trenches and fixing water pipes all day long. Huang Tao worked as a workshop worker at a Shanghai leather shoe factory, a pretty decent job back then. The two of them had grown up together since they were kids, their bond as strong as iron. They were practically inseparable, sticking together every single day. Before working for the water supply company, Zhao Long had served in the military. He was a veteran. The two men were roughly the same age, around 30 years old in 1983. But Huang Tao had a better job at the leather shoe factory, which meant he had better living conditions. He'd gotten married as early as 1981. In contrast, Zhao Long remained a bachelor all this time. Working as a laborer for the engineering team, he didn't have much going for him financially, which made it difficult for him to find a wife, even though he was already well past the typical marrying age. Huang Tao was married to a woman surnamed Zhuang. His wife isn't really important to this story. What matters is how close he was to Zhao Long. Later on, Huang Tao decided to introduce his wife's younger sister, his own sister-in-law, to Zhao Long. When Zhao Long saw his sister-in-law, he was immediately smitten, exclaiming, "Wow, she's absolutely gorgeous." He was extremely satisfied with her. And just like that, Zhao Long and Huang Tao, who had been childhood friends their entire lives, became brothers-in-law, or as people in northern China say, they became Tiaodan, connected by marriage to two sisters. Needless to say, Zhao Long and his entire family were completely delighted with the sister-in-law that Huang Tao had introduced to him. Her name was Kuang Yan. In May 1983, Zhao Long and Chuang Yan registered their marriage and tied the knot. After their wedding, the four of them, two sisters on one side and two childhood friends on the other, became an inseparable quartet, their relationship growing even closer and stronger than before. They spent every single weekend together, cooking meals at home, hanging out, going on outings in the countryside. They visited all the major scenic spots in Shanghai together, taking countless photos to document their happy times. To be honest, if things had stayed this way forever, their lives would have been incredibly happy. Just imagine marrying your best friend's sister-in-law, and the four of you spending your days together like this. It really would have been a wonderful, enviable life. Days went by happily, one after another, until that fateful day. After Zhao Long got married, Huang Tao became a regular visitor at his house, as close friends often do. One day, Huang Tao dropped by Zhao Long's place again to chat and hang out. That night, the two of them naturally decided to cook some food and have a few drinks together. On that particular day, Zhao Long volunteered to go to the kitchen and cook. While he was chopping vegetables in the kitchen, he wanted his wife Wang Yan to come help him out, so he stepped out of the kitchen and was about to call her in the living room. Back in those days, the houses in Shanghai County were like the small attics typical of 1980s Shanghai. From the kitchen, you could see straight into the living room. It was a tiny space, with just one bedroom right next to the living room. In theory, Huang Tao should have been sitting on the sofa next to the coffee table in the living room, and Zhao Long should have been able to see him clearly from the kitchen. But when he looked up, he noticed that the living room was completely empty. He called out to his wife, "Huang Yan. Huang Yan. Can you come here for a second? I need your help." At that moment, his wife suddenly emerged from the adjacent bedroom, looking extremely flustered and agitated. Zhao Long watched her closely, and right after she came out, Huang Tao also walked out of the same bedroom and sat down casually on the sofa. In that instant, Zhao Long was left speechless. What could he even say? He just had this gut feeling, this sense that something was terribly wrong. He couldn't shake off the feeling that something fishy was going on, but it wasn't the kind of thing he could bring up or talk about with anyone else. And so, the moment passed without a word. Zhao Long was usually the kind of person who didn't dwell on small things, but this time, his wife's unusual behavior stuck in his mind. Once you start suspecting something, you can't stop thinking about it, and eventually, you start noticing all kinds of little clues. A memory suddenly popped into his head. About a month or two earlier, he had seen his wife Wang Yan walking out of the residential compound where Huang Tao lived. At the time, he thought it was a bit odd, but he hadn't paid much attention to it. Now, as he recalled that incident, another memory surfaced. Around the same time, he had run into Huang Tao walking out of his own residential compound one afternoon. He'd asked Huang Tao, "Hey, what are you doing here?" Huang Tao had replied, "I came to see you." At the time, Zhao Long hadn't thought anything of it, but now, looking back, it all made sense. If he'd come to see him, why had he shown up at his house when he knew full well that he was at work? The more he thought about it, the more suspicious he became. But what could he do? He didn't want to confront Huang Tao about it, and he didn't want to ask his wife directly either. So he decided to just keep an eye on things and wait. Days turned into weeks, and life went on as usual until one day, which happened to be a traditional Chinese festival, though I can't remember exactly which one it was. On that day, Zhao Long said to Huang Tao, "Brother, let's have a proper drink and a good meal today. Come over to my place, and we'll really enjoy ourselves." Huang Tao was overjoyed at the invitation, and that night, he showed up at Zhao Long's house with 2 bottles of liquor in hand. I won't go into the details of their drinking session. Suffice it to say that Zhao Long drank heavily that night, downing glass after glass in quick succession. Before long, he was completely drunk. Was he really drunk? Yes, he was so drunk that he could barely stand up straight. It was getting late, around 9 or 10 o'clock in the evening, and it was time for bed. He lay down on the bed and said to Huang Tao, "Huang Tao, don't bother going back home tonight. You can sleep on the sofa in the living room. I'm too drunk to move. We're having a great time today, so just crash here for the night, okay?" Huang Tao agreed, and that's how he ended up staying over. But here's the thing. Even though Zhao Long was thoroughly intoxicated, his mind was perfectly clear. He pretended to be sound asleep, lying motionless in bed and snoring loudly. Pretending to be asleep like that wasn't easy. It was actually quite an ordeal, having to lie completely still without moving a muscle. Meanwhile, his wife busied herself tidying up the place before finally going to bed too. I wasn't there in person, but I imagine it was around midnight, maybe a little before then, when Zhao Long, still lying in the same position and snoring steadily, felt his wife quietly get out of bed and leave the bedroom. At that moment, Zhao Long thought to himself. So you're finally leaving the room just as I thought you would. But he kept on snoring loudly, making sure his snores were loud enough to be heard outside the bedroom door. He listened as his wife walked to the bathroom first and went inside. Normally, she would have come right back after using the bathroom, but this time, she didn't return. He strained his ears to listen, but he couldn't hear anything else from outside the bedroom door. He silently cursed himself for snoring so loudly. If he hadn't been making so much noise, he would have been able to hear everything that was going on out there. But now, his own snores were drowning out all other sounds, making it impossible for him to eavesdrop clearly. It didn't last long, only a minute or two at most, before he started hearing faint, rustling sounds coming from the living room. Sounds that clearly didn't belong to someone just sitting around or sleeping. Zhao Long lay completely still, not daring to move a muscle, waiting patiently for what would happen next. And then, finally, he heard it, the sounds that he had been dreading, sounds that were impossible to put into words. In that instant, Zhao Long's anger flared up like wildfire. That's just how people are when you suspect something terrible is happening. You have to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. He jumped up from the bed in a split second. In that tiny attic apartment, the distance from the bedroom to the living room was negligible. He stood at the bedroom door and looked into the living room. And what he saw made his blood boil with rage. There were his wife and Huang Tao. Huang Tao was standing up, and his wife was lying on the sofa, and the two of them were in the middle of doing something unspeakable together. Zhao Long's sudden appearance scared both Huang Tao and his wife half to death. But fate has a cruel sense of irony at that very moment. Because Zhao Long had been lying down for so long and was still under the influence of alcohol, he suddenly felt dizzy and nauseous, overcome by a violent urge to vomit. He couldn't control it at all. He stumbled into the bathroom and started vomiting violently. While he was throwing up his guts in the bathroom, Huang Tao realized that their secret had been exposed. There was nothing left to say. He quickly got dressed, opened the door, and ran away as fast as he could, knowing full well that if he stayed, Zhao Long would kill him on the spot. Can you imagine how that felt for Zhao Long? After finally finishing vomiting, he was left feeling utterly devastated. From that day on, he never spoke to Huang Tao again, and his relationship with his wife deteriorated to the point of no return. Days dragged on miserably, and that massive green hat that Huang Tao had forced him to wear weighed heavily on his mind, driving him to the brink of madness. What could he do? Faced with a situation like this, betrayed by both his best friend and his wife, who were now connected to him by marriage, what options did he have? He had no one to talk to about it, no one who could understand the depth of his pain. He had no choice but to suffer in silence, day after day. This went on until 1984, when Zhao Long could no longer bear living with Wang Yan. Their affair was still going on. How could a relationship like that ever be broken off? It was impossible. In the end, Zhao Long made up his mind and asked his wife for a divorce, bringing it up several times over the following months. Whenever Zhao Long got drunk, he would grab a kitchen knife and go to the leather shoe factory where Huang Tao worked, determined to fight him to the death. Every time he showed up at the factory drunk and brandishing a knife, the factory security guards would manage to stop him and send him home. Eventually, the court got involved and tried to mediate between them. This was back in the days when courts often tried to reconcile couples rather than granting divorces easily. Their parents also stepped in, trying to persuade them to work things out. Additionally, when Huang Tao's factory found out about the despicable things he'd done, they punished him severely. He was given a serious demerit on his work record, and his bonus was docked for 6 whole months. In the end, various parties including the neighborhood committee stepped in to mediate, and the matter was temporarily swept under the rug, suppressed for the time being. Zhao Long had no choice but to continue living this miserable life, putting up with the unbearable situation for the sake of keeping the peace. What else could he do? Back in those days, people were more inclined to endure unhappy marriages rather than get divorced. But if you asked me, he should have gotten a divorce right then and there, because mediation was completely useless in this case. Once a mirror cracks, can you ever make it whole again? No, just like a broken guitar can never produce the same beautiful melody as it once did. This state of affairs dragged on until 1985. One day in September of that year, Zhao Long was sitting at home, staring blankly into space, when suddenly, someone knocked loudly on his front door. Knock, knock, knock. He opened the door to find an old body standing there. When he took a closer look, he exclaimed in surprise, "Wow! It's you, Zhang Hui." Zhang Hui was dressed in a police uniform. He'd come to visit Zhao Long. They hadn't seen each other in years. They were childhood friends, after all, and they were absolutely thrilled to reunite. They chatted excitedly at Zhao Long's house for a while, and then Zhang Hui said, "Come on, man, my treat. Let's go out to a restaurant, eat some good food, and catch up properly." Over dinner, after a few rounds of drinks, Zhao Long finally learned the full story. Zhang Hui was originally from Shanghai County too, but later he'd moved to Yunnan, where he'd joined the Judicial Bureau and become a police officer working at a reform-through labor camp under the Bureau. He was back in town on vacation to visit his family. That's why he'd made a point of inviting his old friend out for dinner. After finishing their meal, Zhang Hui suggested going back to his place to continue their conversation. "Come on, along, let's go to my house and chat some more. We haven't seen each other in years, and we've got a lot to talk about." Zhao Long agreed and followed Zhang Hui back to his home. As they sat there chatting, Zhao Long said with a sigh, "Wow, brother, you've really made a name for yourself, haven't you? You're a police officer now. Look at me, I'm just a lowly laborer for the water supply company, digging sewers with a shovel all day long. Man, it's enough to make you feel like dying. You've got this amazing job as a cop, which is something I've always dreamed of doing." Zhang Hui couldn't help but show off a little. "Oh, come on, along, being a cop isn't that big of a deal." With that, he reached under his bed and pulled out a pistol. It was a Type 54 handgun. "Look at this, brother, I even brought my gun with me on this trip." "Go on, hold it. You served in the military, didn't you? You know your way around guns." Zhao Long's eyes lit up. He was dying to hold it, but he hesitated a little. Zhang Hui said, "Don't worry, I'll unload the bullets first, then you can play with it." Zhao Long held the gun for a while before quickly handing it back to Zhang Hui, who then put it back under his bed and continued boasting about how great his life was in Yunnan. It was just typical bragging. Shanghai people love to show off, after all. I've met plenty of Shanghai folks, and they all have a tendency to brag about their achievements. Later, when Zhao Long left Zhang Hui's house, he was in a daze. He couldn't even remember which foot he'd used to step out the door, or how he'd managed to walk all the way back home. He couldn't stop thinking about it. They'd been childhood friends, growing up together in the same neighborhood, and now look at them. Zhang Hui was a respected police officer with a gun, while he was stuck working a dead-end job, lugging a shovel around and digging sewers for a living. It really made him feel like life was unfair. Why did some people get all the luck, while others were stuck in the gutter? Before Zhao Long left, Zhang Hui had said to him, "Hey, I'm here on vacation for a while after National Day. I'll stay until the end of October before going back to Yunnan. We'll have to get together for another drink before I leave. Let's catch up some more later." Days went by, one after another, but ever since seeing Zhang Hui, Zhao Long had been like a man possessed, completely lost in his own thoughts. He was unhappy, miserable, and utterly miserable. He stopped going to work regularly, spending his days drinking heavily and chain-smoking, drowning his sorrows in alcohol and tobacco. His family could clearly see that something was wrong with him, but they had no idea what to do to help him. His colleagues at the factory also noticed his decline, but they were unaware of the pain and anger that were eating him alive from the inside. At that moment, he desperately needed a true friend to confide in, someone who could listen to his troubles and offer him comfort, but this was the kind of thing he could never tell anyone else about. So he continued to drown his sorrows in drink, day after day, trapped in his own private hell. And that's when he began to hate Huang Tao with a burning passion. Because that humiliating green hat was still firmly planted on his head, a constant reminder of his wife's betrayal and his best friend's treachery. If he had gotten a divorce from Wang Yan, it would have been a different story. He wouldn't have had to bear the shame of being cuckolded anymore. But since their marriage was still legally intact, that green hat remained on his head, a symbol of his powerlessness and his pain, and his resentment only grew deeper and more intense with each passing day. They say that when people are pushed to their breaking point, they'll do anything to change their situation, and that's exactly what happened to Xiao Long. He spent his days cooped up at home, his heart filled with an ever-growing hatred for Huang Tao. He couldn't stop thinking about it. Huang Tao, you and I were like brothers, growing up together side by side. In 1983, you introduced Wang Yan to me, and I was so grateful to you that I treated you like a god. Back then, peony cigarettes were the most sought-after brand in Shanghai. They were practically a luxury item, and I brought you 2 cartons of them. Every now and then, along with bottles of good liquor. How many favors did you get from me? All because you'd introduced me to Chuang Yan, and I was so thankful to you for it. If you'd had an affair with her before we got married, I might have been able to forgive you. I would have swallowed my pride and accepted it. But we've been married for years now, and you're still carrying on with her behind my back. You don't even have the decency to respect me as a human being. You're just rubbing salt in my wounds, treating me like a complete fool. He knew that this situation couldn't go on forever. It had to be resolved, one way or another. And then, one day, a thought suddenly crossed his mind, a thought so terrifying that it made him shudder. Zhang Wei had a gun. The idea of taking that gun and killing Huang Tao popped into his head, and it sent a chill down his spine. As I've said before, no one has the right to take another person's life. Everyone knows that killing someone means you'll have to pay with your own life. How could he even think of doing something like that? But in the end, Zhao Long gritted his teeth, clenched his fists, and made up his mind. Fuck you, Huang Tao. You were the one who betrayed our friendship first. Don't blame me for being ruthless in return. I'm going to kill you, even if it costs me my own life. October 22nd, 1985. It was a Sunday. You can check the calendar if you don't believe me. I guarantee you that day was definitely a Sunday. For me, it's a day that I'll never forget, a day that's etched into my memory forever. On the afternoon of that day, Zhao Long went to Zhang Hui's house. Bong Wei wasn't home. He'd gone out to play at the Bund, since it was the weekend. Back in those days, houses didn't have security doors or anything like that. Breaking in was child's play. Zhao Long climbed through the kitchen window of Wang Hui's house, walked straight to his bedroom, lifted the covers on his bed, and there it was, the Type 54 handgun, along with 20 rounds of ammunition. He stuffed both the gun and the bullets into his pocket, climbed back out the window, and ran home, hiding the weapon in a secret place. Then, around 5 o'clock in the evening, when it was time for dinner, Zhao Long took the gun and left his house. Every person has to go through a moral struggle when they're about to do something terrible, and Zhao Long was no exception. After stealing Zhang Hui's gun and taking it home, he'd hesitated for a long time, torn between his sense of right and wrong and his burning desire for revenge. He'd even taken one last look at his parents, as if saying goodbye to them silently, before heading straight for Huang Tao's house. And let's not forget, Zhao Long was a veteran who'd served in the military. He knew exactly how to use a gun, so I don't need to explain how proficient he was with it. When he arrived at Huang Tao's front door, the two men hadn't spoken to each other in a long time. Their friendship had been completely destroyed long ago. Zhao Long kicked the door open with a single, powerful blow. Inside the house, Huang Tao, his wife, who was also surnamed Duang, her name was Duang Li, or something like that, and their 8-year-old son were sitting around the dining table, eating their dinner together. They looked like the perfect, happy family, full of warmth and joy. But Zhao Long didn't hesitate for a second. He pulled out his gun and opened fire on Huang Tao, Wang Li, and their young son. Bang 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 bang, 6 shots in total, 2 bullets for each of them, all fired directly at their foreheads, blowing their skulls wide open and splattering their brains everywhere. According to the police officers who later investigated the crime scene, it was a scene of utter horror, so gruesome that it would haunt their nightmares for the rest of their lives. The heads of all 3 family members had been completely shattered, and the floor was covered in a pool of blood and brain matter, a sight so terrifying that no one who saw it could ever forget it. Immediately after that, Zhao Long ran as fast as he could to Suwei District. The journey from Shanghai County to Suwei District took him about 40 minutes on foot, and by the time he arrived, it was already around 7 o'clock in the evening. Suwei District was where his parents-in-law lived, his wife Wang Yan's parents' house. At that moment, his father-in-law, mother-in-law, and his wife Wang Yan were all at home, sitting in the living room watching TV, having just finished their dinner. By this point, Zhao Long had already killed 3 people, and his eyes were bloodshot with rage. He didn't care about anything anymore, not even his own life. When he arrived at his mother-in-law's house, he did the exact same thing he'd done at Huang Tao's house. He kicked the front door open with a single, violent kick. At that moment, his wife Wang Yan was standing in the hallway. Zhao Long raised his gun and fired 2 shots at her, bang bang, hitting her directly in the head, face, and chest, killing her instantly. Hearing the sound of gunshots, his father-in-law ran out of the inner room to see what was going on. Zhao Long didn't hesitate. He fired 1 shot at him, hitting him square in the face, and he collapsed to the ground, dead on the spot. Moments later, his mother-in-law also ran out of the room, and Zhao Long shot her twice as well, bang bang, killing her instantly too. In total, he fired 6 more shots, killing all 3 of them, their skulls shattered and their brains splattered all over the floor, with blood pooling everywhere. Completely consumed by his rage, Zhao Long turned around and walked away from the scene calmly, as if nothing had happened. But here's what happened next. Just as he was leaving, his brother-in-law Wang Yan's older brother was nearby, not far from the house. He suddenly heard the sound of gunshots coming from his parents' home and immediately ran towards the house to see what was going on. As he ran, he collided head-on with Zhao Long, who was just leaving the scene. The 2 men were only about 30 to 40 meters apart. When Zhao Long saw that it was his brother-in-law, he raised his gun without hesitation and fired 2 shots directly at him. But because he was so overcome with anger and adrenaline, his aim was off. His brother-in-law saw that his brother-in-law was trying to kill him and was so scared that he jumped out of the way, narrowly avoiding the bullets. You can just imagine how terrified that brother-in-law was. When Zhao Long saw that he'd missed, he turned around and ran away, leaving the brother-in-law trembling with fear. He'd never seen anything like this in his entire life. He was so scared that he ran to a nearby chicken coop and hid inside, too terrified to come out. Later, when people reported the crime and the police arrived to investigate, they found him still hiding in the chicken coop, too petrified to move or speak. It just goes to show, in real-life gunfights, people don't act like they do in movies. They get scared out of their wits, their courage completely deserting them. As soon as the police received the report, the entire Shanghai Public Security Bureau was mobilized. They found Wang Hai, the brother-in-law, hiding in the chicken coop and pulled him out. He was shaking like a leaf, so scared that he couldn't even speak properly. It took him a long time to finally calm down enough to explain the complicated relationship between Zhao Long, Huang Tao, his sister Huang Yan, and his older sister Huang Li. After piecing together the whole story, the police finally identified Zhao Long as the prime suspect and launched a citywide manhunt to catch him. But here's the thing, after killing 6 people, Zhao Long was completely panicked. He had no idea where to run or what to do next. He went to the house of a buddy of his surnamed Pan, borrowed a bicycle from him, and also asked him for 100 yuan in cash. Then he got on the bicycle and started riding aimlessly, not knowing where he was going. Eventually, a thought crossed his mind. He should go see his grandmother. He wanted to ask her for some more money, since he'd been raised by her when he was a child and had a very close relationship with her. His grandmother lived in Hongkou district, so he rode his bicycle all the way there, arriving very late at night, around midnight. The police had been tracking his movements the entire time, and they eventually traced him to his grandmother's house. By the time they arrived, they had the entire house surrounded. They knew he was inside because someone had reported seeing him enter the house. The police officers surrounded the house and started shouting at him through the windows and doors, "Zhao Long, you can't run away, you're completely surrounded. Surrender yourself now, and hand over your weapon." As they were shouting, a single gunshot suddenly rang out from inside the house. When the police heard the gunshot, they immediately assumed that Zhao Long was firing at them, trying to resist arrest. They were all terrified, and they continued shouting at him throughout the entire night, but none of them dared to go inside the house, fearing that he would shoot them. As dawn approached, someone mentioned hearing another gunshot coming from inside the house, but no one knew what it meant. No one came out of the house, dead or alive. Just before sunrise, a large reinforcement team from the armed police arrived on the scene, completely surrounding the area and setting up a perimeter. The police officers knew for sure that Zhao Long was inside the house with a gun, but they were too scared to get close to the building, too afraid of being shot. Finally, his grandmother and a young child who was also staying at the house opened the door and came out. His grandmother was so scared that she couldn't even speak. She just pointed frantically at the inside of the house, using hand gestures to try to communicate with the police. The police officers followed the direction she was pointing and looked inside the house. And there they saw it, a man lying on the floor, his skull shattered and his brains splattered everywhere, with blood pooling around his body, covering the entire floor. Even then, the police didn't dare to go inside the house. They thought that the man lying on the floor was someone that Zhao Long had killed, and that Zhao Long himself was still hiding somewhere inside the house, waiting to ambush them. They couldn't see the gun anywhere, which only made them more nervous. It wasn't until later, when they questioned his grandmother and the child, that they finally realized the truth. The man lying dead on the floor was Zhao Long himself. As I'm about to tell you, Zhao Long had committed suicide, shooting himself in the temple with a single bullet. But here's what happened. When he pulled the trigger, the gun slipped from his hand and fell to the floor immediately after firing the shot. Even though the bullet had killed him instantly, his body didn't collapse right away. It remained standing for a brief moment before finally falling to the ground, pinning the gun underneath it. That's why the police couldn't see the gun. They thought he was still hiding somewhere inside the house, waiting to attack them. It wasn't until they confirmed beyond a shadow of a doubt that the dead man on the floor was indeed Zhao Long that the police finally mustered up the courage to go inside the house, using sticks to poke at the body and retrieve the gun from underneath it. And that, my friends, was the tragic end of Zhao Long's life. This case, which took place in Shanghai in 1985, was the deadliest shooting incident in the city since the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949, with a total of 6 people killed. In the end, the perpetrator had also died by suicide. Everyone who needed to be killed was dead, and there was nothing left to do but close the case. But this wasn't the end of the story. This was just the first major shooting incident in 1985. Then, in 1987, another shooting occurred in Shanghai, and I can tell you a little bit about that case too. I suspect that most people in the older generation, those who are a bit more senior in age, have heard of this case, the 1987 shooting involving Yu Shuangge, a police officer from the Shanghai Maritime Public Security Bureau. Yu Shuangge worked as a shipboard police officer, patrolling ships that sailed to Southeast Asia. Back in the 1980s, especially around 1987, foreign cigarettes were extremely scarce and hard to come by in China, as the country was still in the early stages of its reform and opening up policy. So Yu Shuangge, taking advantage of his position as a shipboard police officer, started smuggling foreign cigarette brands like Hilton, Marlboro, and Liu. He would bring these cigarettes back to Shanghai and sell them to cigarette dealers at a profit, making a lot of illegal money in the process. But eventually, someone reported his illegal activities to the Maritime Public Security Bureau, and as a result, Yu Shuangge was fired from his position as a shipboard police officer and transferred to a different job, essentially demoted to a meaningless position where he no longer had the opportunity to make easy money from smuggling. Working this new job, he no longer had access to the lucrative profits he'd enjoyed as a shipboard police officer. Understandably, Yu Shuangge was extremely resentful towards his superiors for punishing him like this. Later on, he got addicted to gambling and lost all the money he'd made from smuggling, eventually racking up huge debts that he had no way of repaying. Trapped and desperate, he finally made the fateful decision to take a desperate risk to commit a crime that would either make him rich or cost him his life. On the night of April 9, 1987, he snuck into the security office of the Shanghai Maritime Shipping Bureau. He knew the place like the back of his hand, having worked there for so long. From the shipboard police officer's office, he stole a Type 54 handgun, a Type 64 handgun, and 4 rounds of ammunition. Then, on November 18, 1987, Yu Shuangge took the ultimate risk. He decided to rob a bank. He went to an industrial and commercial Bank of China savings office located in Hongkou District, armed with the stolen guns. He arrived at the savings office around noon, a time when there were very few customers inside. He walked into the bank, pulled out his gun, and shouted at the female bank teller, "Don't move, this is a robbery." The female teller's name was Xu Lijuan. She was only 22 years old at the time, young and brave. Without hesitation, she quickly pressed the alarm button, triggering the bank security alarm. The sound of the alarm blaring scared Yu Shuangge half to death. He panicked completely. In a fit of rage, he raised his gun and shot Xu Lijuan directly in the head, killing her instantly. Then he turned around and ran away from the bank as fast as he could, fleeing the scene of the crime. And this just goes to prove my point. When I say that Zhang Shuhai has nerves of steel 1 in 5 million, I mean every word of it. When Zhang Shuhai robbed a bank, he walked in with a shotgun, and even though the bank staff immediately triggered the alarm, he remained completely calm and composed, showing no signs of fear or panic whatsoever.